Hi, everybody. Today, our topic is Zen Buddhism. So, last week we were introduced to some of the main concepts of Buddhism, always referring back to our studies of Hinduism at the beginning of the course. And here we're looking at one particular school of Buddhism, to call it that, within the Mahayana tradition. Remember, we identified the Mahayana tradition and today the Theravada tradition as the two kind of main divisions within the Buddhist world. Zen Buddhism is an interesting case because not only is it one of the schools of Mahayana, but you will be familiar with this term Zen. I mean, this has entered American, European, Western popular culture in a big way. So today we'll try to get at some of the origins of those references and understand this tradition a bit better, just briefly. So here we have a work of art typical of the style of Zen. It's minimalistic, it's very plain, it involves some beautiful calligraphy, which is one of the many practices, artistic practices within Zen Buddhism. And there's a certain lightness about it. I would recommend to your attention, right? There's nothing heavy, not a lot of bright colors. This reflects the simplicity of the tradition itself. Of, for example, in the case of Zazen meditation, just sitting, right? So we'll see this play out a bit in the tradition. Just for quick sections here, some of the basic teachings and ideas. Of course, everything that we discussed last week applies in a certain way to the Zen Buddhist tradition. Specific concepts to Zen, namely Zazen, the koan, and the practice of sanzen, or meeting with your master. The aim of Satori as the goal of practice, insofar as it can be said to have a goal. This is enlightenment. And Zen practice itself. And here we will refer to the reading from Shunryu Suzuki's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, that accompanied the reading from Smith and Novak that our other remarks are based on. Zen Buddhism begins in Novak and Smith's presentation from the flower sermon. And this is a defining event at the beginning of this Zen tradition as it's imagined by its practitioners. The Buddha, with his disciples, sat down and held up a flower and did not speak. In that moment, there were blank looks or looks of incomprehension on the part of many of the disciples present. But one of his disciples, Mahakasyapa, smiled at the Buddha, a smile of recognition. And in that moment, the Buddha is said to have known that he had succeeded in effecting a mind-to-mind transmission. We have at the last point here a special transmission outside the scriptures. Right? Mahakasyapa had not necessarily, perhaps he had studied all of the scriptures, knew all of the teachings. In fact, one imagines perhaps he did, right? But his Satori, his awakening, occurred from that direct mind to mind contact outside of language, outside of scripture. And that is essential to the Zen Buddhist tradition. As we see in the second point here, Zen sees words as limited, right? Words construct an artificial world. They're different from what they describe. We can get caught up with words, caught up with titles, caught up with concepts and logic, right? Sometimes all of that is important. But what Zen Buddhism is offering us is this claim that our highest experiences, including enlightenment, cannot be described in words, cannot be conveyed in words. I think here an example might be if you are with a loved one, whether it is a parent or a child or a spouse or partner of any kind. When you achieve a certain degree of intimacy with that person, words are not necessary to convey a wide range of emotions. I think all of us, I should hope all of us at some time have experienced this. This is the kind of experience that Zen Buddhism is pointing to in calling for us to move beyond words. To complete the quote in the third point here, a special transmission outside the scriptures with no dependence upon words or letters, a direct seeing into one's own true nature. Here we have a very famous image, and it's from a popular Vietnamese Zen teacher named Thich Nhat Hanh. His name is Nhat Hanh. Thich, it means brother in Vietnamese. He left Vietnam after the Vietnam War and settled in France, where from his practice center, Plum Village, he's welcomed practitioners from around the world, both new and advanced, over the past 30 or 40 years. He's a beloved author and spiritual teacher and travels around still now at a very advanced age. We have a quotation from him here, building on a remark made by Smith and Novak in their chapter about the finger and the moon. The Buddha said, "My teachings are a finger pointing to the moon. Do not get caught in thinking that the finger is the moon. It is because of the finger that you can see the moon." I point to the moon, yeah? When I point to the moon, you don't look at my finger. I mean, maybe you do look at my finger, but that's a special case, right? Usually you'd say, oh, what's up there, right? You look at the thing to which the finger points. Your attention would not be drawn to that thing were it not for the finger, the teachings of Buddhism, right? He's not saying throw out all the teachings and have nothing at all. But he's saying if you focus on that finger, right? Everything has to be perfect. Everything must be reconciled and make perfect logical sense. I will become an expert in the finger. You're missing the point. The point is what the finger is pointing to. And in this case, it is the moon. This is what Zen Buddhism is saying about experience. If you get so focused on the teachings of Buddhism or any religion, within Christianity, the same principle could be perhaps adopted and has been in some places. If you get so caught up with that that you forget what is the object of that, what is it pointing to? Why am I doing it in the first place? You'll be missing out and you will fail to achieve your intended goal. Here we have a short passage quoted by Smith and Novak. It's from a well-known Zen Buddhist text, and they do not identify it as coming from this place. The text is the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, Huineng. This is a famous text in Buddhism. There's a series historically of patriarchs, of leaders of Zen Buddhism for a certain period of its history. And this is a story about the sixth, Hui Nang. In that story, Hui Nang comes to a monastery and enters that monastery as a poor boy from the provinces, basically, right? He's the new guy. He doesn't know anything. There is a contest in the monastery, and all of the students, Hui Nang is not yet a student, he's just kind of hanging around. All of the formal students are invited to compose a quatrain, 4 lines of verse, expressing the teachings of Buddhism. And so someone claiming to understand Buddhism, this is the top student in the class, number 1, right? He writes the following on the wall. The body is the Bodhi tree, the tree where the Buddha sat when he was enlightened. The mind is a mirror, bright. Take heed to keep it always clean, the mind, and let no dust alight. Right? What do we have here? A counsel of taking great care with your practice, right? Focusing, effort, all of this. Take great care to keep it always clean, this mirror of your mind, right? Huinang sees this written on the wall, and he realizes that this is not a correct understanding of the teaching of the Buddha. He is at once corrected by an opposite quatrain from Huineng, which becomes accepted as the true Zen position. So Huineng, the non-student, hanger-around guy, writes the following. The Bodhi tree does not exist, nor does the mirror bright. If from the first no thing exists, where can dust alight? So what is he saying here? He's saying that this striving, this effort, this focus on perfection in one's practice is actually not the right path, right? In fact, it can present an obstacle to realization. If what Buddhism says is true, if there is emptiness at the heart of all things, right? We saw this with the idea of no self, anatman, right? if emptiness is the truth of things, and we get caught up in our practice so much that we kind of obsess about it, right? That is an obstacle. So Zen Buddhism tries to remove that obstacle, right, by focusing on this emptiness of all things, and the simplicity of everyday life just as it is, without all of the doctrines and teachings interposing themselves. Line from Smith and Novak: the point regarding Zen's relation to reason is a double one. 2 points. First, Zen logic and description make sense only from experiential perspectives, radically different from the ordinary. Second, Zen masters are determined that their students attain the experience itself, not allow talk to take its place, right? If you're a Zen practitioner, your goal is not to memorize all the sutras and teachings. Perhaps you do, but your doing that will not advance you along the path. What will advance you along the path, right, is this new experience, this new experiential perspective that is opened up by simply sitting, right? And that is where we're coming to here. Zazen, the koan, and sanzen, three terms to take with you from Buddhism. Zazen is seated meditation, literally means sitting meditation. It's often practiced in what's called a zendo. It's a meditation hall where people sit. You might sit for long periods or short periods in the morning. I have had the opportunity to be at a Zen practice center for about a month, and every morning we would sit and then have breakfast, work, lunch, free time, and then sit. That was the rhythm of the day. And we would sit together, and we would then have these meetings, these sanzen meetings, which we're coming to. This is how Zen is practiced. As thoughts and emotions and so forth, anything, right, enter your mind, the practice is not to cling to them, right? So if you get a thought in your mind like, oh, I'm so worried about this or that, right? Don't follow it and begin to worry about it, but also don't judge yourself and say, oh, you're so bad. Why are you thinking again? You have to stop, right? Repress the thought. No, that is its own problem, right? That's the problem of that first poet. I got to work really hard to keep my mind clear and clean. Like, no, that kind of striving and obsessing over things will actually be an impediment, be an obstacle. So simply, the metaphor often used is of a river, right? The river is going along. And what do you say? Oh, here comes a boat. There goes the boat. Goodbye, boat, right? Here comes, I don't know, a swimmer, right? Oh, goodbye, swimmer. There you go, right? You don't cling to them, call out to them, hold on to them, push them away. You just let it go and you just observe. I couldn't help myself. Nothing happens next. This is it. Because you might be thinking that right now, right? I mean, like, what's the point here? What are you doing? You are literally just sitting, my friend. You are literally just sitting. Path, you are achieving, Zen Buddhism proposes, a much greater depth and ultimately enlightenment itself, than you could, in any other way. A koan, what are you thinking about? There's a certain way you are thinking about something. You're sitting with something, let's say, right? A koan literally means a problem or a case. It does not have an obvious solution. Right? I didn't put up this one here, but it's the most famous one. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Right? Two hands, one hand. Oh no, where's the other hand? The snarky thing that the teenagers do is this, right? Yeah, no, that's not the solution. Um, this is meant, these questions, what is the sound of one hand clapping, right? Meant to break down your logical thinking, right? Not to make you irrational, but to make you realize that language is limited, right? Language contains these kinds of paradoxes, these kind of irresolvable things that aren't resolvable in terms of logic, like, oh, that's the answer. No, it's not the answer, right? The answer is what you come to after months, years even, sitting with that question, right? And an answer that is then affirmed by a master who is able, within the Zen tradition, to, confirm or deny that you have demonstrated in your giving him or her the answer, a correct answer, right? So it's a very master-disciple structured tradition because of this mind-to-mind business, right? Discipleship, almost apprenticeship, is a constant feature because you can't just sit down and read a book, become an expert, and then suddenly you're enlightened. Not how it works in Zen Buddhism. Another example: what was the appearance of your face before your ancestors were born? I mean, the answer is, who knows? Why am I studying these liberal arts? No, sit with it. These are examples that have been used for hundreds of years in Zen practice and have in fact borne great fruit in the lives of those who have sat with them. Last point here: practitioners are meditating on this koan. They also have, as I mentioned, private daily consultations, meetings with a master, right? That master will either say, no, wrong answer, go, right? Or, yes, good answer, here's your next koan. That happens much more rarely. Or just encourage the person, right? Because you could legit be working on this thing for years, like Smith and Novak say. It's like a doctoral dissertation, right? It's not the same activity at all, but the duration is the same. It's a huge investment of life. Um, so this is called sanzen. The Rinzai and Soto are two schools within Zen Buddhism that we don't have time this week to go into. There's some differences between them. The term sanzen is used in Rinzai Zen, and the term dokusan is used in Soto Zen. The picture on the screen here is of folks. It's the only one I could find, actually. There's very few pictures of this. Folks lined up. They kind of place these meditation cushions in a line, and then you sit on the cushion and you wait for the person in front of you to go talk to the master. And we're not talking hours here. We're talking like, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, three. And then the next person goes and everybody moves up. So you just kind of shuffle your way all the way up to the master. That's how it was done at the place where I was in residence for that month. The goal, right? What's the point of all this? The goal is Satori, enlightenment, right? Now, this is not different from nirvana. You're not entering nirvana in this life precisely, but you are living as an enlightened person, right? And Smith and Novak, to their credit, I think, and usefully for us this week, don't get into all of the technicalities of this on a conceptual level, but they focus on practicalities. What does it actually look like if you've been practicing Zen, you've done your koan, you've done your Zazen, you've had your sanzen meetings, right? And now you've achieved Satori. You've become yourself a master, able to facilitate others in those sanzen meetings. Well, according to Smith and Novak, life seems very good, extraordinarily good. You're able to focus on the good and the beauty in things, and not even able to focus as if it's a conscious effort. You simply do. This is a mark of someone who has achieved Satori. You take an objective outlook on your relations with others, right? You don't say, oh, this is owed to me and that is owed to you. Those distinctions between me and you rather break down, right? And one is led to a broader perspective. In the West, we might call this a God's eye view, right? When you're interacting with somebody, you're in fact thinking primarily about what is in their interest, what is their good, and how can you objectively even facilitate that. And finally, it calls on one to engage with the world and not withdraw from the world, right? Because we've seen this all the way back from Hinduism, right? A sannyasa in the fourth stage of life, right, withdraws, a forest dweller, out of the cities, out of the life, leaving the family, right? This is what the Buddha does at his great going forth at the beginning of his practice, right? He leaves his wife and child at that time. He goes off and finds religious and moral teachers. In Zen Buddhism, this withdrawal is not uh, called for. Rather, one is called to go and to live one's life, even as one was doing, but now with a new awareness and a new way of being. So, just a few more quick slides here to introduce our author, primary source author. for this week. Shunryu Suzuki was a popular, I have here, Soto Zen teacher and monk. That's the difference of the schools that I mentioned. He was in San Francisco, and this was a very significant thing because a lot of ideas about Zen Buddhism got into what we call the counterculture in the 1960s. And Shunryu Suzuki, as a guy who literally had a building, basically at Haight and Ashbury, like in San Francisco in the 60s, was able to facilitate and shape a lot of that. He was known as the Little Suzuki. That's how he was presented to me when I first learned about him. The Big Suzuki is D.T. Suzuki, mentioned at the beginning of Smith and Novak's reading for this week as the main popularizer of Zen throughout the 20th century. Shunryu Suzuki wrote one book during his lifetime. D.T. Suzuki wrote dozens. So they're very different figures. Shunryu Suzuki was more focused on the day-to-day practice of Zen, as evidenced by what's in his book. The book is Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. You're reading from the 50th anniversary edition. This is a beloved book, often returned to even by advanced practitioners, and it was the only book published during his lifetime. We have some selections from this about posture and breathing, mind waves, he calls them. That's kind of the river image that we had before, right? Just let the waves go. Don't grasp onto them. Don't try to change them. Zen for Suzuki is, as he emphasizes, nothing special. Nothing special. So you study religion, right? And you're like, oh, well, this is going to be very mystical and otherworldly. Maybe there will be candles and rituals and robes and things like this. What Suzuki is proposing is this, that what he means by Zen is simply everyday life, right? It is simply sitting, not sitting with the choirs of angels alighting about you, but simply sitting, very plain, like the artwork that we started with. In order to ensure this, we get the title of his book, the idea of a beginner's mind. Right? When you're a beginner, you ask naive questions, innocent questions, right? You don't think that you know everything. You're not kind of puffed up with your own wisdom and experience. You're willing to try things in an almost childlike way. And that is what Shunryu Suzuki is calling for. Here's our last slide, and we're going to wrap up here. This is from the portion of the reading entitled Mind Waves. And of all the quotations that I pulled from this seems like the one worth our attention in our short lecture. He writes, when you are practicing Zazen, do not try to stop your thinking. Let it stop by itself. If something comes into your mind, let it come in and let it go out. It will not stay long. When you try to stop your thinking, it means you are bothered by it. Do not be bothered by anything. It appears as if something comes from outside your mind, but actually it is only the waves of your mind. And if you are not bothered by the waves, gradually they will become calmer and calmer. In 5 or at most 10 minutes, your mind will be completely serene and calm. At that time, your breathing will become quite slow, while your pulse will become a little faster. I encourage all of you to consider sitting for 10 minutes. What a thought. Even 5 minutes, as he says here. Sitting and just watching the thoughts come and go. For this week of Buddhism, we don't really have a practice component built into the course, but this is a week when it's highly appropriate simply to try this out for yourself. You don't need equipment, you don't need special books. All you need is your body, and to sit down, to watch your thoughts come and go, to follow your breath, counting often like up to 10, and then again up to 10, and just be and see if that leads you to have some confidence in these claims from Zen Buddhism about the importance of getting beyond language. Thank you.